Thank you so much for joining us today on Connect and Collaborate, where we come together each day to introduce you to our network of business and community leaders and to discuss important issues that impact business in Colorado and the region. I'm Tammy Schaefer, your on-air producer, and when we talk about things that impact business and our economy, education is certainly one of them. And this week on Connect and Collaborate, we are focusing on secondary education. Our shows all week long are sponsored by Talent Found. Talent Found connects students, job seekers, workers, and businesses with the programs, tools, and resources to design their own unique paths to career and business success. Talent Found is championed by the Colorado Workforce Development Council and powered by Talent Found charter affiliates. Talent Found: discover ability, develop talent, and find success. And you can learn more about Talent Found at talentfound.org. And as we get started today, I want to introduce some great people. We're talking, yes, about secondary education, but we're going to focus today on STEM, and in particular that P20 STEM education and entrepreneurship. I want to introduce some fantastic guests we have here. I have Arlen Meyer. Arlen is, I lost my notes, Arlen. I'm sorry. Arlen is the president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, also known as SOAP. Welcome, Arlen. Thanks so much for being here. Good to be back. You're also the chairman of the board at Global Minded.
I am.
And Arlen teaches bio-entrepreneurship at the graduate school at the Anschutz Medical Campus.
I do.
So, yeah, you've got a great background for this conversation, and I'll leave it to you to introduce your guests as well.
Sure. So, thanks for joining us. I thought today we would talk about, as we said, STEM education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So, with us today is Penny Euchre, and Penny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi. Thank you for having me today. So I am the executive director of STEM School Highlands Ranch, and we are a K-12 public charter school, and our focus is preparing future workforce in STEM, but also in the arts.
Great. And also with us today is Dr. Jeff Sitters, who actually used to be a student of mine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine and now working for the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. So Jeff, why don't you give us some of your background?
Thank you, Dr. Myers, and it's a real pleasure to be here and be part of this discussion. At the Department of Labor and Employment, we're really focused on making sure that our talent has the right skills to match the needs of industry, both today and into the future. So we create programs that are going to train individuals and sometimes do it in a very versatile, quick turnaround kind of way, and then also go out and connect the dots between individual job candidates and companies that are looking for talent. And that's where my role as a business outreach or engagement specialist comes into play. So I need to develop relationships with both my candidate pool and also with businesses and keep an eye toward what is our horizon with career pathways.
Now, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a lot about the STEM environment. And Arlen, I think we need to kind of clarify, what is STEM? I know we're all familiar with it, but I still hear from people that they don't know where the acronym comes from or what it stands for. And I'll point it out. It's science, technology, engineering, and math. But you'd like to make a further point.
Right. So it started with that acronym, and I can see why people confuse that with stem cells or stem cell therapy or something that has some other kind of STEM. But
where they think then that when you're talking about STEM, it's isolated into one particular field of science, but it's actually
right. It's meant to sort of cover science, engineering, math, technology, sort of the hard science math curriculum. Over the years, and I'll ask Penny to sort of elaborate on this, it's sort of evolved into from STEM to STEAM, STEAM, and then not so recently, there was another part to it that was STEAME, STEAMIE, which represents innovation and entrepreneurship. So I'll ask Penny to sort of elaborate on that and why did the A show up in STEM?
I think to be more inclusive, parents, especially if you're thinking about enrolling a child in school, and if you're thinking kindergarten, you're looking at your 4-year-old, and do you really want to put them on a pathway of hard engineering, STEM, and you look at your little one and you want to make sure they have the arts. And so I think the letters kept being additive to make sure that we captured the whole child. And really, any good STEM program has a strong arts component. And so we don't have the A in it, but everything we do has the arts in it. And as far as innovation and entrepreneurship, that is the heart of STEM. I mean, why would you study STEM if you didn't have the vision of what is the future and what are the future needs, which, as we all know, it's hard to predict, but very exciting.
So tell us a little bit about, so the A, just to be clear, stands for the arts. And so does it, in fact, really impact the outcomes of STEM education when you add the A or the arts?
It's a force multiplier. So when you have a strong arts program in a STEM school like we do, what you find is whole brain engagement in problem solving and creativity. So students, as they're learning perhaps something in their English class, they can take it to their music production class, write music to it, and it engages the whole brain in ways that you as a medical doctors probably would understand better than we do. But what we see as educators is just almost a frightening level of knowledge acquisition because students are so engaged. And we see it all the way down to the youngest age.
Now, I've visited your place, and it's a pretty impressive place. Tell us a little bit about your school.
So what we looked at when we designed this school is what do students want, what do parents want, and especially at the high school level that we're focused on today, high schoolers want to collaborate. They don't want to put away their technology. They actually want to enhance what they're learning with technology. They want what's the latest in design. And when you open the floodgates and let them collaborate around very specific content, you have engagement like no one has ever seen. And so when you walk into the school, you feel the energy of very highly engaged students. So our students are the highest scoring in Douglas County out of 15 high schools. We have the highest SAT scores, but that's not our focus. That's just an outcome. And our students are top ranked in cybersecurity, but they also win juried art shows. They won a national award from the entertainment industry on music production. They can do it all because we believe they can do it all.
And just to be clear, your school is K through 12.
It is K through 12 free public school.
And how do students get into your school?
They get on our lottery, and so we it's straight up lottery, no testing, no requirements except to apply, and the application just means you would like to attend our school. And our students come from up to 100 miles of driving each day, round trip to parents are so committed to allowing their children to have this kind of opportunity that they're willing to drive their children that far.
So you don't have to live in Douglas County?
No, you don't. In fact, a significant number of our students come from other districts.
Anywhere in the state?
Anywhere in Colorado.
If they wanted to transport their child back and forth or figure out a way to do it.
That's true, but we're on a mission that we want to bring this opportunity to all students, and so now we are linked to rural Colorado. We partner with Arickory. It's a tiny little little over 100 students, K-12, and we actually collaborate with their classes, and we've transformed their computer science, and their students have actually transformed our students because rural students are exceptional problem solvers. Mm-hmm. And so it's a two-way street. We also partner with Mexico and other countries with our what we call the sync. It's a synchronous online, so anyone in the world can actually participate in our education.
So Jeff, let's hand it off to you. So why is it important that Penny be doing what she's doing or I'm doing what I'm doing in terms of STEM education, innovation, entrepreneurship? Why should industry care? Why should the state care? Maybe you can fill in some of the blanks.
Absolutely. So one thing that we now know is vitally important is developing our talent pipeline to have the skills around STEM, creative thinking, problem solving, because those are where the jobs of the future are going to require. Those are the skills that the jobs of the future are going to require. And when we look at what kind of jobs in the state of Colorado are going to be most in demand, they're going to be mid-skilled, mid-level jobs that are going to require an overlay with STEM proficiency. In fact, when we look at our top jobs right now available in the state of Colorado, and we define it labor and employment, a top job is being a job that has a living wage, and the best top jobs would have a living wage for a family of three. They're in growth industries, and they're going to have a relatively high number of openings per year. Those jobs, 66% of those jobs require STEM proficiency. And that is only going to increase as we go forward, and computing and automation begins to transform many of our industries.
Now, when you say STEM proficiency,
Yes.
what does that exactly mean? Does that mean that you have to know how to do differential equations? Does it mean that you know how you have to use Word? Does it mean that you have to program? I mean, what in fact does that mean?
Yeah, it means that you need to have very targeted skill sets that industry is defining for us. Industry is getting very granular these days, and in fact, the reason why they are giving us so much useful feedback is because we're going forth and we're asking them to give us this feedback. We're getting industry leaders in our advanced sectors where the growth is the greatest, where they have these STEM jobs. We're asking them, tell us what are those key skills that we need, because we're going to inform our education partners, we're going to inform our training partners, and we're going to create demand-driven training programs that will have a just-in-time kind of model to them, where you don't have to learn differential equations if that's not going to be necessary for you to access the on-ramp into manufacturing technology. Maybe down the road, if you want to upskill and assume a job of greater responsibility and scope, you might want to learn that, or if you want to design things.
Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about sort of the talent pipeline ecosystem in the state of Colorado, because I think one of the problems that we'll talk about in a little bit is smokestacking and stovepiping, or whatever you want to call it. It's everybody sort of has their own little turf, and they don't play nice with each other. So in your mind, what are the elements of the talent pipeline ecosystem in Colorado that we need to coordinate?
Yeah. So this is where I think the Workforce Development Council, which is has the governor's office oversees their activities. They have overlap in collaboration with economic development. They have pulled together industry, economic development, workforce development, and education. And they put us all into the same room with industry leaders sitting at the forefront. They're the ones who have a place at the main table. The rest of us are actually in an audience, and we're listening to them talk about the problems of the day. They're telling us, well, number one, our pressure points are in workforce development, maybe they're in supply chain, maybe they're in other things, and they're defining for us what their priorities are. And then we can start to develop our systems to respond to their needs, both right now for those individuals who need to get a job tomorrow and access an on-ramp in industry, as well as know what that coming wave looks like.
So what are they telling you? What do they want Penny to teach her and her faculty to teach the students to satisfy the need? All
right. So of the skills that are most in demand, a couple of things always rise to the forefront. Foundational professional skills. Across all domains, across all industries, industry is telling us our students are graduating, especially from our K-12 educational system, with deficiencies in those professional skills, in those soft skills, communication, ability to function on a team, taking feedback, reliability, dependability in some ways. And then beyond that, our most in-demand skills that we're hearing about are in the digital realm. Digital technology, having digital skills that enable you to work within whatever industry it is going to be critically important, and especially when we talk about where the jobs are going to grow the fastest in our advanced industries. Digital skills will be the number one in-demand skill. So we're right now trying to figure out how much digital technology needs to be incorporated into training programs, not just at proprietary universities like Colorado and CSU, but also in these demand-driven training programs that will enable the workforce of the future to be able to access and operate the technologies that are going to be present in the jobs.
And we're listening. We're hearing the same thing from industry. What our industry partners are telling us is their industries are changing so fast, it is almost frightening to them how quickly their scaling and their exponential growth. And so what we're finding is we're changing what we teach. So we are very focused on the certificates that students can earn, SolidWorks, all sorts of level that they're professional certificates that will stay with them and help them get those mid-level if they decide to go right into the workforce or if they decide to go to higher ed. But at the same time, we're also putting them into apprenticeships, and that's where they learn those adult soft skills that teenagers are, even though they may come in without some of them, they quickly assimilate into the workforce. Another area that we're very focused on is making sure that students can level up. So if they don't have the skills today, what skills do they need? Because you can't ask a student who's so far from the college entrance to be successful. And what some districts like Denver public schools have found, only 15% are successful in community college. So they have an 85% dropout rate. How can we empower students so that they are successful as they go to the next stage?
So what is the role in this ecosystem? You mentioned, obviously, students and student support systems, educators, state workforce development people, companies, economic development agencies. What's the role of nonprofits, for example, like Global Minded that I work with? What's the role of foundations that fund these initiatives? And some people would argue that, and we'll get to this in a minute, but some people would argue that Colorado is not the best place to find the money. That there are other places in the country that are better in terms of actually funding these kinds of programs. And so what is your reaction to that?
Yeah. I would say that nonprofits such as Global Minded are vitally important in our talent development ecosystem, and here's why. We've known for a long time, and the literature supports this, and I see this anecdotally every day. We need role models. We need mentors. The earlier that you can engage, especially underrepresented populations who typically do not access STEM in the classroom, let alone STEM careers, the more likely you can begin to inspire them. And especially from a platform like Global Minded and nonprofits, we're able to find people who are near peer role models who reflect the demographics, the culture, maybe the ability status of some of those populations in K through 12. And then we can begin to make those connections. And then that can make all the difference in the world in whether or not a student then participates in STEM education and chooses one of the more lucrative career pathways going forward. And foundations to fund, you're right, the government cannot be all things to all people. In fact, what we're trying to do is provide the seed money, the vision, and the guidance for apprenticeship programs, for these work-based learning opportunities, and then have enough buy-in and see enough return on investment from industry so that they will then begin funding these, so that the private sector will come on board, because private sector funding can always make course adjustments so much faster and be much more versatile than government can.
So I want to discuss some of the problems before in the next segment we'll get to some of the solutions and what we're doing here in Colorado. But we've mentioned creating a diverse talent pipeline. We've mentioned teaching students not what to learn but how to learn, because the jobs of the future we haven't defined yet. We've mentioned that the business model may have to change in terms of 4-year degrees, and it takes too long and it costs too much money, and we're talking about stackable certificates, and the recent MIT announcement that was, basically get in graduate school and you don't have to apply, you just have to be able to demonstrate a competency to do certain things. So what other problems do you see that we need to solve in the state of Colorado? There's the Colorado paradox, there's the shortage of teachers, there's the burnout of teachers, there's a very low high school graduation rate, there's inadequate state funding, and I mean, we could kind of go on and on and on. And maybe these things might impact whether, in fact, a company like Amazon decides to come to Denver. Mm-hmm. So what other things do you see in your world that we need to fix?
Penny?
One area that worries me is the fact that school boards have the power to decide which schools can operate in a district. And so we have a very highly successful school that we would like to replicate in other districts. But the feeling of having a very strong school come in and disrupting is fearful for some. And my feeling is parents and students should have access and opportunity. The politics, of which I'm not an expert, I believe that the way we've structured how schools can operate is preventing great opportunity for all students, and that worries me.
And what about the state education funding model? Is that a problem?
Not really. We're one of the lowest funded schools in the state and probably in the nation. We receive about $7,300 a student. Denver's a little over $9,000. If we were in Wyoming, it's $15,000. Back east, some of the states are close to $30,000. So we operate on a shoestring budget, and if you walk in, you don't feel that. So even though I would love foundation support, we do all right. And my feeling is because we have a very strong program with a tight budget. If we can do it, anyone can do it.
So how is your agency, Jeff, dealing with these problems? I mean, or could you add more to the list? I mean,
absolutely. And you had mentioned earlier about other places maybe being more favorable to find money. There are some best practices in funding workforce development and work-based learning programs in other states that maybe we can look at going forward, which is why it's all the more important that right now we really solidify our community of practice here in Colorado. We create work-based learning communities so that we can make the best of the resources that we have and that we partner in lockstep with schools like Penny's and STEM so that it is a seamless transition moving from K through 12 into the right training program and into workforce development. What I would add to the list of things, and you mentioned the structural barriers, they are all significant and there are brilliant people in various departments, many much smarter than I, that are grappling with those. I often work in the realm of the perceptual barriers. Barriers to educational access, barriers to employment access. And when we talk about the talent gap that exists out there, it isn't just in skills, it's in access based upon ability status, underrepresented minority populations, folks who maybe haven't been, as you mentioned something earlier. You said, Penny, we believe in our students. Sometimes in education, when you come from one of those populations, that external support's not there. And so individuals feel like they're on the sidelines right from the get-go, and they stay that way. We have a significant portion of our population right now that has talents and abilities. At Labor and Employment, we have placed folks with autism, neurodiversity into amazing jobs, but we'd love for them to start getting their education sooner. And so that's the education, the evangelism to businesses to see the value and the opportunity, reduce perceptual barriers, and also on the educational front, to begin helping teachers see that reach out to these populations. Yes, they're receiving special assistance or services, or maybe there's some socioeconomic turbulence in those families. All the more important to connect with mentoring opportunities from nonprofits such as Global Minded, work together, and then maybe we can start to move the needle a little bit in terms of our available talent pool that's here in Colorado. And
just to add to that, I would say 20% of students everywhere are highly successful and have great self-advocacy. The 80% are marginalized. And many of the listeners, I'm sure, are thinking back on their feelings about high school and who gave them that sense of self and who created lifelong feelings of inadequacy. And when you're talking students in special ed especially, we feel that you give them equal opportunity, they shine, as you have seen with your adults with autism. Some of our autistic students are our stars, and I agree that we need to make sure we're inclusive of all students.
Thank you so much. We are having a conversation not only on secondary education, but on STEM, the P20 to STEM, entrepreneurship and education. We'll be back with more with Dr. Penelope Euchre, with Jeff Sitters from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, and with Arlen Myers, President and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. Stay with us. Our shows this week are sponsored by Talent Found. You can find them at talentfound.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back. For staying with us today here on Connect and Collaborate. This week we're focusing on secondary education, and today our conversation is about K-20 STEM education and entrepreneurship. I have a great roundtable of guests here today. This is fantastic. Arlen Myers is president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. Arlen, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And we're also talking with Dr. Penny Euchre. She's the Chief Executive Officer, of STEM School and Academy. That's in Highlands Ranch.
Yes.
Thank you, Penny. And Jeff Sitters from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. And Arlen, when we were kind of setting this up, and when I said it's a really good roundtable, it is because you, Arlen, are kind of focusing on where are the holes in STEM education. Penny is in the avenue of educating those students, and Jeff is in that area of getting them into the workforce, really. Right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, this is a great conversation. I'm going to hand it to you to continue.
Right. Well, since this program is called Money Talk, I think we should talk about money. So one of the research indicates that in student success literature that there are a couple things that define outcomes. One is someone who cares, and I think all of us who are listening remembers Teacher X or Mr. Y or Miss whatever who made an impact on our education. I know I did. It was Miss Adler in my 8th grade in my English class. So one is somebody who cares. Two is experiential learning. Students have to be able to get out into the real world and understand. You mentioned it before, the relevance of what they're learning. If it's math, if it's science, who cares? Why should I learn this? What's the impact? A third one is extracurricular activity, which allows them to practice what we refer to as the hidden curriculum, which are the things that employers are looking for. What you mentioned, Jeff, complex problem solving, communication, team building, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, but not the least, and certainly probably the most important for parents listening to this, are the cost of education and student loans. And is the cost going to justify the benefit? So how would you address that to listeners who are saying, I'd really like my kid to go to Harvard, but A, I'm not sure he or she could get in, and B, I probably couldn't afford it even if they did. So how would you, particularly for the folks that are not tracked into the college track?
Yep.
I mean, let's remember about 25 or 30% of Americans have a 4-year college degree. If you extend that to now a large percentage of alternate education that go to Metro, I mean, these are adult learners who have jobs with families. So it's not like maybe you and I went to, with the sort of rigid 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, all that stuff. I mean, the world has changed. So how would you address that to a parent who says, what can you do for my kid? I can't afford to send them to XYZ.
Yeah, absolutely. And, welcome to the future, because the future is now. And this is industry-led advisements and discussions are telling us they want the workforce of the future to be skilled and in their seats doing things to help business and industry innovate faster. And the model, and there was a very interesting discussion at Boulder Startup Week last May. It'll be coming up again this May. Really neat little entrepreneurial community ecosystem that comes together. Startup companies mingle with established enterprise companies, and really they talk about how can we all work together to drive innovation into the future. And they were talking about the role of education. And again, people far more knowledgeable than myself were talking about how there needs to be an evolution in the way people are trained, because we simply will not be able to create the programs and the adaptive skill sets fast enough in the proprietary systems that can take months, if even years, to adjust their curriculum and their focus. When skills, as you had mentioned, are evolving, Penny, so quickly out there. And that's where, when you're a parent and you're thinking about that next step in education, Arlen, I'd really say, look at what skill sets are going to be relevant for your career destination. That's why through Talent Found and through online models, which can be found at Careers in Colorado, we have visual career pathways. Look at those career pathways, find those lucrative destinations, and then figure out where's your on-ramp. And that on-ramp may only require upskilling to the certificate level. You may be able to get digital badging or stack certificates. I say digital badge, that's something where you may never have to set foot in a classroom, but you can gain that skill and competency through an online venue. So doing that, and then the experiential learning, and I can speak more, Arlen, to that, what the state is doing to support that. So that experiential learning with the demand-driven training that's very targeted to an industry destination point, that's really the future. Think about that before just choosing to go off to a four-year university.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute, but Penny, so how do you respond to, well, wait a minute. I mean, education is more than just about getting a job. I mean, what about civic responsibility and just being a decent human being? And so are you telling me that I shouldn't major in French?
No, we have French students, and they travel to France, and we host French students. So actually, we have a great pipeline of future French, perhaps majors, and we work with the French Chamber of Commerce in Denver, and they have helped our students see the future of jobs if they are a Francophile. So I just wanted to mention something, what you said, Jeff, that you don't have to go to the 4-year. You can do the on-ramp with just a certificate, and that's the future. So I think that is where we need to focus for students who don't want the crushing debt and a 4-year when they don't really know for sure if that's where they want to go. So they get a certificate, they can level up. Do they love this? Then they can keep going. And I love the permeable model where they can test it with a low investment of a certificate, try that workforce, and then they can eventually get a 4-year degree, even a doctorate, if they have that passion and desire, but they don't have that huge crushing debt and made a mistake like so many people do.
So maybe you can educate our audience, since you have a PhD in education, about what is a stackable certificate? What does that mean?
So a stackable certificate is actually built on concepts in industry where if you work in a certain area, and I guess I'm speaking out of my lane into medicine, that you level up in your skills and specialties. And so say in cybersecurity, there are entry levels that you can get at high school where it's industry recognized that you can work at low level in cybersecurity. You build proficiency at that level. You have the certificate that says you have competencies and skills. And then once you work in that area, then you can go to the next. And those, you're probably more of an expert than I am, but industries have defined what's next. And so when you look at people in IT, they have pages of stackable certificates. And depending on the work sector, they demand as a basic entry to that type of work to have those certificates. For example, CNC router, it's a piece of equipment that does advanced manufacturing machining. You could be a very entry level, or you can write a machine code for that. And Lockheed Martin currently has postings at $90-some thousand for an entry level CNC technician, and they can't fill it.
Yeah, and may I make one point, Arlen?
Sure.
Just add to that. So our state has a 4-part roadmap. Each year about this time, a talent pipeline report comes out, and it identifies essentially what are our threat areas, and then it comes up with goals. And how are we going to address those threats so that we have the kind of talent development system that we're going to need? And to your point about stackable certificates, there's going to be a big thrust, even bigger than it has been so far, to generate industry recognized credentials or certificates at the high school level. How neat would it be for high school students, even those that go on to 4-year university, become doctors or physicians or PhDs in education, but to have a certificate in one hand and a diploma in the other? They've already got that. They're already starting to put their foot into that industry.
So what's holding that up? Why doesn't that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think there's several reasons why that's probably not been happening and it not been expanded to the extent that we're going to. Number one, some of that recognition is a little bit newer. So the infrastructure and the systems are now starting to come online. Number two probably is funding. There is an expansion grant for apprenticeships, and there are several different grant models that are being used throughout the state to target educational systems. I believe they had $1 million appropriated, but they could not provide access to all the school districts that applied. And there were probably some structural problems or issues or challenges that came up in that. And that's just from the state perspective. Funding from other sources to drive this same model and these same outcomes could exist out there as well. That would be my first stab at it, and then I'd pull in a subject matter expert to probably delve a little bit deeper.
So you mentioned apprenticeships, and there's been a lot of buzz about that lately at the federal level, at the state level. Governor Hickenlooper has been a pretty pronounced advocate of that. There are all kinds of programs in the state. Could you kind of fill us in, like where does Colorado stand with apprenticeships, and where do we need to go?
Yeah. So right now we have about 500 apprenticeship programs, and the key when we
excuse me for interrupting.
What is it?
Yeah, what is it? So our listeners understand what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So an apprenticeship is a training program. It's a model for training that encompasses a few core elements. Number one, from the standpoint of the participant, the worker, they're employed. So the employer hires this individual and starts to pay a wage. They're getting specific instruction on the job to learn that job, not just the technical aspects, but also the culture, the way that company needs that job performed. And then they're getting classroom instruction. So it's like going to college without getting the college degree or assuming debt. Instead, you're getting paid to do this. And so that additional instruction then augments what they're learning on the job. And it is that structure that's allowing us to take that 2-year window to take for medical assistants to go from not having any knowledge or skills and getting into the workforce in the hospitals and narrow it down to 1 year. And those hospital systems that are stepping up to do that apprenticeship program, they now have this pipeline of employees that are well versed and trained in their particular culture. So they're more productive and up and running faster. So that's really the key to the apprenticeship. And we're focusing right now, again, in those growth areas because we know where the jobs of the future are going to be. We want to create pipelines there, and we want to have experiential learning for students before, exactly as Penny said, they make these big commitments to go to the 4-year universities. You might do an apprenticeship and decide you need to level up or upskill into another area afterwards, but this gives you that first really good initial experience.
And just to be clear, you can do an apprenticeship at a certain age because there are child labor laws and there are liability laws and all this other business. So how old do you have to be to actually start doing it?
So typically for the apprenticeships, we're looking at about 18 years old, and a lot of that is industry mandated. So we have really solid apprenticeship programs in HVAC and in utilities. We have one in IT here in the state of Colorado.
And who is doing? Can you give us some examples of companies that are doing this?
So Tri-State Power has a successful registered apprenticeship. So they're helping to create a new pipeline of individuals who will be out there as technicians. And I think that has a potential to expand into other job functions within their company. RK Mechanical Systems in Denver, has apprenticeships to teach people all kinds of hands-on jobs that are going to involve mechanical repair, diagnosis, systems repair, things like that. And then we're starting to look at apprenticeships into those non-traditional venues that are not skilled trades, that are not what we typically think of as blue collar, but instead they're the intellectual jobs or the white collar, and that's IT, that's healthcare. And right now in the state of Colorado, we have thousands of mid-level IT jobs that are not being filled. And an apprenticeship in IT is a way, it's a conduit to start creating a pipeline to fill those positions.
So if I'm a CEO of a company and I'm facing a labor shortage, which most CEOs seem to be facing, how would I get involved in this program? And do I just raise my hand and say, I want to sponsor an apprenticeship, and that's that?
No, again, when we think of state government, sometimes we think of complicating more than complementing. But I will say this, we are getting this down to a science. We are figuring out how to make this user-friendly, easy to access, and easy to execute. So really, through the Department of Labor and Employment, it would be very easy. We have a website where folks can learn more about it initially and then contact us inbound, and we could very quickly set up a meeting. In about 20 minutes, we could give you the schematics of what's going to be needed to be done. If you're interested in going down that avenue, as well as what are the best practice models that currently exist. So within IT, instead of hitting companies one by one and having each of those individual companies raise their hand, we'd like to start creating roundtable discussions. Expose these companies to these concepts, see who's interested. Maybe not everybody's interested now. Maybe some will be more interested down the road. But then we have industry leaders who want to engage in that conversation, all receiving information at once. And so we have efforts underway to do that.
Great.
So we have a connection to what you're doing. In Colorado, we're the first in the nation, and Governor Hickenlooper is the champion of this, the Swiss model.
Yes.
And so the Colorado model is called careerwise, headed up by Noel Ginsberg and Gretchen Morgan. And STEM School Highlands Ranch is a partner in that. And so when you ask how old, you can be as young as 15. And depending on the sector, it's actually very effective. And in the Swiss model, what they said, so one of their big apprenticeship pathways, of course, at Switzerland, is banking and in the finance sector. And they said that no teenager has ever broken confidentiality, whereas adults have. So teenagers will really rise to the culture of the workforce. And for our students we've placed, it's transforming. They carry themselves in a different way. The businesses are very excited to have them. And it's not philanthropy, because CEOs, the last thing CEOs really want to tolerate at this point is philanthropy. They want to know return on investment.
Yes.
And within a year of an apprentice, depending on the sector, it goes from an investment to a return. And some earlier. We placed several students this past summer, and one student, his creative design for a advanced manufacturing company resulted in a patent.
Wow.
And he was only 15, and it transformed that company into thinking, we would like more of your students. It brings a certain energy and passion that infused that they didn't anticipate.
It also brings the voice of the customer. I mean,
Yes.
these folks are, a different generation. You're making products and services, and you're
Right.
not talking to a younger audience, so you're making stuff for a market that's in the rearview mirror. So it helps to have younger folks.
Yeah, and at Labor and Employment, we are augmenting the work of CareerWise. They are a core partner, but we are creating apprenticeships into other sectors, within other companies, where CareerWise right now does not have a reach, but and especially to help transitioning adults to access that experiential learning and to show their capabilities as well to the companies. Especially when you're making the transition.
So I want to change topics a little bit, and that is one of the reasons that I got involved in global-minded and sort of diversity work, given that I was in sick care, had to do with some similarities, and one of them is social determinants. And we all know, there's this phrase, your zip code is more important than your genetic code in medicine. And if you have the good fortune to win the ovary lottery and you wind up in a nice neighborhood where there's a good school, and that sort of sends you on a career track that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So it's the same deal with education as it is with sick care, whether it's food security, whether it's crime, whether it's drugs, whether it's et cetera, et cetera. If you happen to live in a place where you're disadvantaged through no fault of your own, it's likely that you're going to face significant hurdles in terms of student success or patient success. So in other words, there are social determinants of outcome disparities in education and in sick care. So my question to you is, how do we deal with those issues? Because again, I wanted to mention the ecosystem because, again, it's at one level, but when you think about it, this problem is a wicked problem, and it's not going to be solved unless we do multi-system engineering. It's not just education. It's about healthcare. It's about jobs. It's about food security. It's about all the other things that ultimately funnel down to whether you're going to be successful or not. So what is your take on that? How is the state integrating, fixing these disparate outcomes such that it translates into a decent job?
Yes. So when I mentioned a moment ago about this talent pipeline report and some of the threats and challenges that have been identified along with proposed solutions, one solution that does begin to tackle the social determinant piece is a two-generation approach. What we're finding with individuals who are in cycles of poverty, we have generational poverty, we have lack of education, and the family as a unit is not progressing over time, is that employment tends to be chronic, both for adults and then as well as for the kids. And so accessing jobs and then accessing companies that are more family friendly and helping companies change their culture to become more family friendly so that they are working with these individuals creatively to find solutions for those social determinants, those other barriers and obstacles that could get in the way of success to employment, along with subsidized employment training dollars for these specific targeted populations is one way that we're starting to move forward. So helping parents navigate the workforce and get back in, helping them better grapple with health. So we don't ever operate in a vacuum. When we talk about setting vocational goals and destinations, we bring on the necessary supports in order to do that, whether it's going through one of our workforce systems or the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is the primary channel that I serve. We talk about what are you going to need to get there, what are those obstacles holistically, because if you don't have that psychosocial foundation, it's going to be very difficult to succeed with employment. And the metrics for this two-generation approach, as far as I know, have not fully matured yet. We don't exactly know what those outcomes are going to be, but I do know that we're starting to look at that much more holistically.
Penny, how are you dealing with this?
Well, I believe that if a school is failing academically, why are they allowed to continue to operate? And it becomes a culture of failure. And I think that school districts need to guarantee that all students will attend a school that believes in their ability. And there are many, I think, great schools that would step in and operate. We just need permission to do so. I don't understand the politics that wants to keep a failing school failing year after year after year, where you lose a generation of students. The research shows if you have 2 years of deficit education, it's hard to ever get back on track. And some of these students have virtually their entire career of being a student in deficit schools, and that's criminal. And we're allowing that. And again, I don't believe it takes more money. I think it takes imagination. And in fact, the fact we don't have money, it makes us more creative. And yes, we're in Highlands Ranch, but yes, we do serve a high proportion of special education, and we have about 140 students on free and reduced. Both of those groups have made greater gains than I think virtually every other school in Colorado, because we believe in our students and their ability to succeed. So deficit schools are a root cause, and why do we allow them to continue?
So I want to use the last few minutes we have to sort of look forward and sort of identify some future challenges and maybe a workforce development. One issue is we talked about innovation and entrepreneurship, and we talked about this in a previous show. I don't think any of us agree that what we're talking about is only teaching children or adults how to start a business. No. That's not what we're talking about. And it's a way of creating user-defined value through the deployment of innovation. That's what we're talking about. One way to do that is to create a company, but there's lots of other ways to do it. And some have referred to that as creating entrepreneurial universities or entrepreneurial high schools or entrepreneurial K through 12. So how do we create entrepreneurial universities and the hallmark, or schools? And the hallmark of an entrepreneurial school is graduating every student with an entrepreneurial mindset. And the mindset is you're creating user-defined value through the deployment of innovation. How do you do that?
You have a culture of problem solving. So when students see a problem in their environment, isn't that the phrase of all great inventors come from that recognition of a need? And so when students are problem solvers starting at age 5, by the time they exit at high school, they are ready to launch their business or product. It's a mindset.
Yeah, I completely agree. We start tapping into that natural inquisitiveness early on, and then we bring in successful role models, people that have been out there and they've done that, to kind of foster that further. And clearly that's what the literature goes for those underrepresented populations. That's where it leads. Get those folks in there to inspire, mentor, show the way.
Thank you so much for such a great and inspiring conversation. We're talking today about P2 STEM education entrepreneurship. We're focusing on secondary education this week here on Connect and Collaborate, and our this week-long week of shows is sponsored by Talent Found, connecting students, job seekers, and workers and businesses with all the programs and resources they need.